Thanks for those who are joining us. My name is Rami Lote. I am a project manager at the FedEx Institute of Technology. The Institute is an advanced research organization committed to making Memphis and the greater Mid-South region an advanced tech hub. We do this through a variety of methods, including but not limited to our interdisciplinary research clusters, providing collaboration opportunities to researchers to collaborate on new initiatives. These areas include cybersecurity testing, drones, quantum computing, smart biomaterials, electric vehicles, additive manufacturing, just to name a few. We also focus part of our efforts on emerging tech workforce development, so we can make Memphis, again, raise up the profile of Memphis. And last, and certainly not least, look at organizations and connect with organizations like CodeCrew to sit there and help raise the profile of local tech organizations here in Memphis. We're excited to have Meka and Sandra from Meka from CodeCrew, and Sandra from the Shelby County Government, CIO for the Shelby County Government. Kayla, I'll let you introduce both of our speakers.
Thank you, Rami. Good afternoon, everyone. Keela Jones, Deputy Executive Director with CodeCrew. Thank you for giving me this opportunity, Rami and FedEx Institute of Technology, to introduce today's speakers, Sandra Perry and Meka Egwuekwe. Sandra comes to us from the Shelby County Government, and she currently is the Chief Information Officer. She directs the Information Technology Services Division in providing technology services for Shelby County's various divisions and departments. These technology services include the infrastructure, enterprise applications, and unified communication platforms utilized to serve Shelby County's constituents. As Director and CIO, she added a wealth of business and technical acumen with 20 plus years of diverse IT experience, specializing in technology infrastructure, and has held progressively responsible technical and management level positions within the county's Information Technology Services Division. Sandra, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Next, we have Meka Egwuekwe. Meka is the co-founder and executive director of CodeCrew, a Memphis-based nonprofit that specializes in youth computer science education. Prior to founding CodeCrew, Meka had been a professional software developer for more than 19 years, building software systems for governments and Fortune 500 companies around the world, most recently as director of software development at Lokion Interactive. Throughout his professional career, Meka has made time to also work with youth and education in various capacities. He has been an alumni admissions representative for Phillips Academy Andover for more than 20 years and served as youth director at his church for more than 5 years. He has also led a spring break college tour for high school students for 13 years. Meka has been a local leader in the youth coding movement since founding the Memphis chapter of Black Girls Code in late 2012. Meka is also a longtime mentor in StartCo's business and technology accelerators, where he has mentored various companies in tech. Meka, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much. Honored to be here.
Thank you, Kayla, that was great. So what I'd like to open it up to both either Meka or Sandra, either one can go first. Just kind of give us a not so much a background on your experience, but kind of your experience as being a minority person of color, navigating your way through the tech industry, and kind of where you see the future of the tech industry with regards to people of color, minorities. So Sandra, coming from a more of a governmental background, governmental aspect, I'll open the floor to you first.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for that, Remy. Yes, as you said, I'm coming from a government space, and you can think of government, it mimics military structure. And when you are coming up through the ranks, you always have to see your next opportunity almost aligning with as if you were in the military. And that's the structure in which I came up in. And I always tell people, yeah, working in county government is just like working for the military and being a member of the military, whereas you have to wait or you have to create those avenues in which for you to excel and move forward by taking the challenges and the opportunities that may not be what everyone else would want, but you have to do that to kind of build your brand and introduce yourself, because otherwise you would just sit there waiting on someone to retire before you can advance and move up. So that's kind of where my 20-year in government has kind of taken the path to this journey of where I now sit as the CIO.
Great, thank you, Sandra. Do you feel like the structure, to kind of play off that, do you feel like the structure inhibits or promotes the idea of saying, hey, I'm someone who can rise up through the ranks, or is it something that creates barriers of entry?
I think it creates the barrier, but you have to be willing to challenge it and say, I'm here, I'm present, because otherwise you basically have so many positions. And in order for you to move into one of those positions, you're either going to, like I said, wait on someone to retire or someone to leave the organization. And I think you just have to challenge yourself. When you feel like you're ready to go to that next level, you basically have to go to those in leadership and let them know that you've got interest and you want to excel and you're willing to take those projects on. Otherwise, you just kind of, like I say, wait till someone retire and then there's an open position that you can move into.
Would you encourage, I would say, would you encourage those people, let's say minorities, people of color, women, to go above and beyond? I mean, I hate to say it that way, that seems very cliche, but it seems like if there's not the opportunity, some people can get discouraged and say, well, you know what, I'm not ever going to get the opportunity. Or can you suggest or give examples of saying, hey, this is when I went not out of my way, but this is when I took an opportunity and elevated my profile?
Right. And I'll say personally for me, because I came up through the hardware, the infrastructure side. And traditionally, when you think of programming, when I started out, the software side, okay, you kind of saw that as that's the typical role for the female. Well, I went for the hardware side. So I'm the only female or one of two or three that's on this infrastructure hardware side. We're dealing with switches, routers, servers, and things like this. So I'm in a male dominated side of technology. So I was always having to let them know that my skill set and my ability should not be seen from the aspects of being a female. So I had to go the extra, but not so much as because it was an intellectual thing. It was because she's a female. We don't want her to move that server. No, I can move this server. I can rack these switches. So that was the kind of thing for me, being on the hardware side. But traditionally, I think we changed that dynamic. Whereas with STEM and different programs like that, we're giving young people, especially women and young girls, the opportunity to see what technology has to offer from different aspects so that they can be seen and be recognized. And then that level of, I can open that door and I'm not looking at her as just a female, but I'm looking at her as a counterpart.
That's amazing you said that, where you said you came in through the hardware side, because the statistics that are read out or put out there are mainly for the software, the programming development side. One never thinks about the actual physical hardware, like you said, servers, racks, switches, all that side, and the lack of representation on that side. That's great. That's great. Thank you. Thank you for such a detailed answer. Meka, I'd like to turn it over to you and basically the same thing. How has your experiences and how has diversity changed throughout the years you've seen coming into with the tech community?
Sure. And I appreciate the opportunity and the question. Thank you, Rami. And yeah, so speaking about my experience, I was definitely on the software side. I went to college and graduate school to earn degrees in computer science before I entered the working world. And I was fortunate to have some internships along the way with those scholarships in college to kind of open some doors for me to land a job immediately right after graduate school. That being said, my experience being an African American in software development was often one of loneliness. I mean, it was very common to be the only African American on a team, sometimes in a whole company. I mostly worked for startups. I mean, my first job was with HP, so Obviously, I wasn't the only African American at HP, but on my team, the only African Americans were me and the administrative assistant for the team. And so, so in terms of an engineering and software development perspective, that was very, very common. It was also very common for me to have more education than my colleagues. I had a master's degree. Some of them didn't have a college degree at all, right? Yet, it took me to get in the door, especially at that time. I'm a big proponent today of breaking down that barrier of entry, but for far too many, especially if you're African American, historically you've had to have more education than your peers, and just for the same jobs, and so that was definitely more common for me in the 90s and the early 2000s, and that's something we're trying to change now as an organization. I sometimes, especially when I told some of my colleagues, not only did I have a master's degree, but I had it from Duke University, they saw it as an opportunity to challenge, especially white and Asian males, especially would challenge me on things in ways that I didn't see them doing with anybody else. And so, but eventually I held my own. I walked in with confidence that I knew technology. I made sure that I worked hard. I felt like I worked as hard as anyone, if not harder than anyone. And I came with great ideas and great tech solutions, and eventually found myself in leadership opportunities, especially the blessing of having gone to a liberal arts college like Morehouse College for my undergrad is that it prepared me to be an interface, if you will, between technical and non-technical people in ways that some of my colleagues who went to, say, Georgia Tech or some other tech-specific schools didn't have. And so so that was my experience. And I will say that again, at that time, the only people I saw without college degrees who were even had careers in the space were white males. That is something that I see changing bit by bit, something CodeCrew is advocating for as well. The sad reality is that too few African Americans even have a chance to afford college, and that shouldn't be a barrier to anyone if they have the talent and the abilities. And so so that is something I'm seeing change, and CodeCrew is a part of that, especially in Memphis. More African Americans being able to get into this space. I'm a huge fan of college, but certainly if you have the abilities, that's what you should be judged on. And so I do see a brighter future that, for people of color in tech, one where there are more opportunities, especially because if our country is going to remain competitive, we've got to dig into that bench that we've for too long ignored.
That's very true. That's very true. Yeah. Where have you both found yourselves in kind of elevated, more executive level positions, acting as role models for those who are coming into not so much the tech industry, but specifically within tech related jobs, going, hey, I can guide, I can mentor this young man, this young woman to go through and find success? Or do you find yourself going, man, you just got to fight the fight and I'll do what I can?
Maybe I'll well, I don't want to talk too much.
No, that's okay. Either one. Sandra, we can start off with you. That's fine.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Remy. Thank you. That's a good question. And I think about the opportunities that where I interact. I use every opportunity. My role now at an executive level, I see that as a challenge for me, because I want young people, especially young people of color, to understand that this journey for me came not from a privileged side. I actually worked and earned it. And I like for them to understand my journey coming from I'm from Orange Mound community, Melrose High School, staying at home to go to college, and to go back to even when my tenure with the county has been one such as I said before, Meka talked about, being able to have the conversations based on your degrees and your background. Or for me, in my workspace, in my work team, when I think about it, when I first launched, I literally was the only one there. Like I say, a female, African-American female, and then with a degree, because all of them came from the military and landed the public sector government job. So I come in, like I say, female, African-American, and degreed. So I want young people, and I had an opportunity to mentor someone last year in the last actually 3 years, and they were a student at Lemoyne, and I was connected to them through a church organization, and I was able to be there to help them navigate the whole college space, the courses to take, because they were a computer science major. That person graduated with honors. That person is now working in San Francisco. I talked to them about making sure they took internships, cross training and all of that to be this well-balanced student. But they actually came to the United States from Zimbabwe looking for an opportunity. And through my church affiliation, that was how I was introduced to this young man. So going back into the community, being a part of my church is still in the community in which I came up in. So I make sure that my platform is not what you see me as, but understand the journey that took place to get me here. And it's open to everyone. No one gave me the silver spoon. I had to find out what grants, what scholarships, all the funding, because I knew what I wanted to do. So I had to knock on the doors. I had to network before I got into the workspace in order for me to get into the workspace. So that's what I kind of want to share. And that's my giving back, that legacy. Don't look at me in this seat. Look at my journey to this seat, because it's available to anyone, especially young girls of color. And Meka, I'll turn it over to you if you want to share.
Very powerful.
Sure.
Yes, Meka. Yeah, thank you.
And thank you. And I share some experiences with Sandra in perspective of church, and as well as she's from Orange Mound. I grew up in Castillo, so it's on the other side of Lamar Airways from Orange Mound, but same zip code, 38114. And that neighborhood has long been economically challenged, and as it is to this day. But I credit church, for example, and for me, having some direction in that regard. And that was it was in church that I saw a lot of mentors that that created opportunities for me, even though they weren't in tech. There definitely weren't a lot of there were almost no African Americans from my work experience that I can necessarily model myself after, in terms of mentor relationships. But I just long been personally interested in others not having that problem, right? And it's not to say that your mentors have to be exclusively African American or exclusively the same race and exclusively the same gender. In fact, I had some great white male mentors. So I don't want to limit yourself to say that you only have to have one mentor and they've got to be that exact same thing that you are. But I did want there to be an atmosphere of that people can see themselves in people who are with similar backgrounds. And so for me, that started in church. It was volunteering at church, whether it's with the kids, as a youth director or teaching Bible study and so forth. And it was CodeCrew that actually gave me this opportunity to actually marry my career in tech with my passion for young people and contributing to a narrative of better opportunities for them. And so when you ask the question about, I would refine myself with respect to mentoring and creating opportunities for others, that's why CodeCrew exists. It is in the K-12 space to get kids to see themselves as tech producers, and giving them the mentoring that they need. And then for adults, it is getting them skilled up in a reasonable amount of time, in a cost-effective way for them to become to have careers and have a ticket into the middle class as software developers. And so that's what I love, eat, sleep, and breathe. I'll say that's my calling in life, is what we're doing at CodeCrew. And it's great to have great partners like Sandra and others who the FedEx Institute, others who believe that this can be done. And so so in partnering with great friends like yourselves, and others who believe that that this ought to happen, mentorship and opportunities ought to happen, we're able to make some progress on that.
Wow, thank you both. Sandra, you definitely were not lying when you said you were a native Memphian. Mecca, I'll say the same to you. You guys live, breathe, eat, and sleep Memphis. That's amazing. Thank you both for those answers. Those were really good. What changes have you both seen? You've both been in the tech space for such a long time. What changes have you seen? How have you seen diversity and inclusion and equity change over the last, even say the last 10 years? I believe parts of the pandemic have most likely accelerated a lot of these initiatives and some of the stuff that's happened during the pandemic. But let's just take a broader view of saying the last 10, 15 years. How have you seen the tech industry kind of morph itself into a place where people of color, minorities have to really prove themselves as something to a space where they now feel more included and feel more equity?
I think one thing that's changed is that we talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion, right? There's even the term DEI for that, which wasn't even a term 10 or 15 or 20 years ago, certainly not 20 years ago, in terms of it being a recognizable thing. Now, obviously, there have been people who have been discussing this since Katherine Johnson at NASA, right? But certainly the fact that we can talk about it and people you don't really have to explain what it is a step forward. I think there's still a lot of work to be done in that regard, though, and some companies and entities and agencies are making more advancements than others. I cite Netflix all the time, where they, in 3 years' time, they doubled the number of African Americans in engineering roles there because they were intentional about doing it. Others have been good, I guess, about publishing their numbers, but have not been so great about actually doing something about that in terms of producing the outcomes and the impact. And so, and then many companies and agencies just don't even know where to start with that, right? I know that there's challenges there, but a lot of great people in tech and in social sciences and other areas that can contribute to that. And so I think the right steps are happening in terms of recognizing this an issue, but then still there are a number of structural barriers. I think the four-year college degree requirement, for example, is one of those structural barriers that keeps capable, talented people from being plugged in and contributors. So there's work there. There's also just work there in terms of dealing with the inertia of discrimination that still continues, and that happens in the workplace. We need to work harder to make our workplaces more inclusive for real. And so, but I'm encouraged, at least, by the direction that compared to where we were, say, 20 years ago. Or 25 years ago when I got started in this space, where that wasn't even a conversation really, except in a handful of people who just understood the seriousness of the problem.
Thank you. Yeah, Sandra, over to you.
I'd have to agree with Meka and so many thoughts that he just shared, because initially, I think people wanted to look at diversity and inclusion as kind of an initiative or a program. Well, that is a life cycle. It has a beginning and an end. Well, in order for it to broaden, even to be adopted and built in and baked into organizations, the conversations, real conversations, had to be had. And it had to include everyone. You had to have diversity in thinking and thought. So therefore, you had to bring everyone to the table and say, let's talk about this. Give it meaning. Let's not, like I say, it's not a program. It's not an initiative where it's going to end once you accomplish something. It is a long-term culture change, and everyone needs to have a voice in that. That's the only way it will be adopted and going forward. Yes, when I look at, the leadership in companies such as used to be in IBMs and all of that, and how the leadership from the top has changed. It's not your traditional face that we've always seen. It makes a great difference. I say, me being an African-American female, a person and a woman of color, and I always resonate with that. Not only am I just an African-American, I'm an African-American female. So I get the 2-for-1. So for people to recognize that I'm not asking for anything other than what I qualify for, you first have to understand what I'm saying and hear me and what that means. What are my thoughts? What am I thinking? What am I being challenged with? You can't create something for me without including me in it. And that's where I think the biggest change has happened. It's no longer a program. It's an actual thought. It's something that people have basically put into their culture, and they're wanting and watching it play out, and they're willing to have the conversations about it.
Let me just add, I think that's so well said. I mean, that it's not just a program, it's a culture change. It's foundational. I mean, if I can just use a tech analogy there, right? You know, we talk about when you're building software systems or building any kind of system, you're talking about functional requirements and non-functional requirements. You know, the functional requirements are the thing, what should it specifically do? And the non-functional requirements are things like performance and reliability and security, right? And, you know, there's an operating system that famously for decades has been not very secure, in large part because security was an afterthought. It was a bolt-on, right? And it's been fighting that battle with respect to security ever since, and still not where it should be, right? And that's the problem that's been in the industry for too long, is that diversity, equity, and inclusion has been a bolt-on. It's been a program, right? Instead of being baked in from the beginning, or at least baked into the culture, even if it's not from the beginning, but baking it into the culture. That's really the only way you're going to achieve that. Anytime you take a bolt-on approach, a program-only approach, you're going to get security failures, you're going to get reliability failures, you're going to get performance failures. And you would think the tech community would understand that better than anyone. And slowly but surely that's happening. So it's not doom and gloom, but that's Sandra hit it right on the head. I mean, you can't just do it with a program. It's got to be a fundamental culture change if you're going to be successful at producing the outcomes we all seek.
Mm-hmm.
I have a family member who works in IT for a large company, and she always said that IT was always looked at as a cost center, not a revenue generator. So whenever things were asked for or things were needed, IT was always told no until it was needed, and then they were said, well, why can't you do it? Well, we don't have the money. So it's interesting that within that kind of trickle down effect within the IT community of being like, hey, if we're looked at as a cost center, not a revenue generator, and kind of a bolt on to the company, for stealing your phrase there, Meka, then we can sit there and say that kind of trickle down effect was like, okay, when it comes to diversity, equity, and inclusion, that's also a bolt on onto what people are looking for. I guess I'd like to transition into kind of where the future lies. You know, we can sit there and say, yes, we can become more diverse, and we can, you know, have more equity and become more inclusive, but kind of what is the overall end game here, for lack of a better term? Where do we see IT environments in the next 10, 15, 20 years? We've seen this massive shift to remote work now, right? And we know that there are communities that are and were struggling during the initial parts of the pandemic, all through continually now struggling to get, you know, such things as broadband internet connection or a stable internet connection or access to IT equipment. Where do either one of you, and Sandra, I'll start with you, where do you see kind of the future of diversity, equity, and inclusion within the IT sector going?
Thank you, Remy. And you know, when you think about the future and you're asking about where do we see it going, and when you look at IT as a whole, because so much has become subscription-based, basically disposable. You know, and you mentioned broadband. We're looking at broadband from the aspects of it being a utility, just like your, you know, lights, your power, and all of that. So technology is moving to the point of it's almost like that utility. It's next to being you have to have it, but it's disposable because it's changing so rapidly that when you are staying relevant in the technology space, and when you're looking to always hone your skills, I don't think, whereas for me in starting out, it was like you learn this and you become an expert, subject matter expert in this. Well, I don't think that's going to be sustainable long-term, because you have to be very, I'll say, diverse in technology, meaning today I'm doing hardware, but I need to understand how that hardware is utilized by the software pieces and vice versa. So staying relevant does not mean that I'm a subject matter expert in just one thing. I've got to broaden my technical horizons. I don't have to do it all, but I need to be able to understand how it all goes together. That giant puzzle of the technology space, I think that's where we needed to start stepping back and creating a curriculum. And I know Meka is working on a program to make that curriculum become a requirement at the high school level. And I think that's absolutely good. The exposure, the quicker and faster and sooner the exposure is there, I think that's going to put the sustainability, because a lot of young people, if they don't hear it from us, they think technology is basically everything that they're doing at home. I think of a colleague who took a trip with her children, and they went to a resort, and the resort was an older resort that didn't have swipe TV screen and all of this. And the kid is just totally lost because he can't get the TV to change because he's just moving left to right across the screen, and it's taking a parent who's my age to tell the kid, you've got to pick up the remote, you got to hit channel up, channel down. And so you just see the evolution of technology. So you can't just say, I'm going to always keep doing this if you want to hone your craft and you really want to be successful. There are those, and I've learned that so much more in working with, CodeCrew and other entities like the Blue Collective. We cannot expect for me, you were told 4 years minimum, preferably do the other 2, but exactly 4 years minimum. But what I learned from that is, I tell young people now, try it in a 2-year space, or especially space like CodeCrew or Blue Collective, to just understand it and then go broaden yourself to the business sides of it, depending on how far you want to advance. And that's kind of my takeaway of seeing it sustainable and bringing more young people into the technology space. How we introduce it to them and the requirements or limitations that we put on them by trying to make this is the format that you must use. I think that's where I see it needs to be opened so that it's available to everyone that has that interest.
I'll add to that too. Because Sandra mentioned a number of things I was going to say also. In terms of like broadband internet access being a utility, it's time. Just think about 100 years ago or so. Toilets were a luxury then, but why would we build a house today, an apartment today without toilets? That's not a luxury anymore. That's a commonplace thing, right? And access to the internet, it's got to be just a commonplace thing. We build sewer lines, we build internet access. I mean, why aren't we doing that? And then also, she mentioned about computer science education. CodeCrew has been active. In fact, I'm driving to Nashville tonight to go advocate for our bill for the next 2 days in Nashville at the State House for computer science education. That does require every middle and high school to offer computer science classes for computer science to be a high school graduation requirement. It's because these kids are growing up today in a world where technology is increasing, and you can ask any of them. They'll tell you it's increasing. None of them will get it wrong and say that it's decreasing, right? They know this. We all know this, and we all grew up at a time when we were learning. We learned photosynthesis in school, and they still do, right? And we learned about electricity in school, right? That's because we grew up in a world where those things were foundational, right? Photosynthesis, you got to understand that agriculture is the foundation of human society. Electricity, we all have that in our lives. We all need to know how it works. But most of us are not working in careers where, I can tell you, I'm not an electrician, right? I'm not a biologist, but I still need to know those things. And kids are growing up today where they need to know computer science. They need to know computational thinking. They need to know how these machines that are increasingly a part of their lives work. They need to have these things on their menu before they're on the menu of these algorithms. And so I think our prosperity as a society depends on that. And so where I see in the next 10 to 15 years is that increasing reality, that increasing acceptance that this is the world that we live in. That doesn't mean you have to have a career in it, but you need to understand it. And some places around our country kind of get that already. It's great to when I'm in Austin, Texas, for example, I can tell you every Uber driver knows how to code, right? It's so ingrained there that being tech producers is just a part of what it is. And so I am thrilled that that there is this movement that for wider and wider and greater access to this understanding of technology, right? And people not drinking the false Kool-Aid that that I'm sure we've all seen all the time, where a 6-year-old masters an iPad and they talk about, well, my 6-year-old is so smart. Well, really, the person who's smart is the one who designed that system, that application, that is even a 6-year-old can do it, right? And so how do we get more connected into more young people, especially connected, really society in general, connected into how these technologies work, such that they understand what they are fundamentally, and such that they're not victims of it as well. And I believe that that's increasingly happening. And couple that with more and more seeing themselves as having careers in the space. That's foundationally necessary. I want artificial intelligence and machine learning to that's inside of a self-driving car to recognize an African American as a human being walking down the street as a pedestrian and not hit me, right? I want facial recognition software, if that's going to be used in the law enforcement space, which I have serious questions about. But if that's going to be used, I don't want to be I don't want to be recognized as someone I'm not. Which it's right now, that technology is weak because of the lack of diversity in these spaces. And so I see though that people are recognizing these issues and recognizing that the only way to achieve it is to move beyond a program, as Sandra said, and institute cultural changes. And be it in corporate America, in government, it's anywhere where technology is being produced. And so I'm optimistic about that. And to be honest, we're not sleeping until we, we get that. So I'm optimistic because we're going to keep pushing that boulder up this mountain, and until we achieve the vision that we all have in terms of a greater society.
Yeah, that's great. It looks like it's from a fundamental level, we have to change, from our foundations have to change as a society to say things like, where Meka, yourself, and Sandra don't have to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that you're capable of doing the work, right? You've got the qualifications, you've got the experience, you've got everything, but you don't have to go 10 degrees above the norm to say, yes, I can do the minimum to get by. I am actually very well qualified to do this. It was shocking and sad to hear that you guys had to go through that, but that was a different time and age in the world as well. So hopefully things have gotten much better for everyone since then. I don't have any more questions.
A long way to go. Go ahead. Well, I was just going to say things are better, but a long way to go. We're making positive steps. So I definitely want to give credit to the progress that's been made. But at the same time, I don't want there to be any confusion about progress being the solution and the progress we've made being it. Right, that's just a word in a greater sentence of a positive outcome in diversity in tech.
No, for sure. I'm sure there's still, and I know from my own experiences as well, as someone who's a minority and person of color, that there's still a long way to go. Very thankful of the opportunities that I've been given. Very thankful of the work that I've had to put in, but there's still a long way to go, and we can't let up, as you say, let up the fight, things like that.
Yeah, and Remy, just to add to that, to piggyback off of what Meka is saying, we have arrived, this is it, we've done it. I don't think that has a ending, because you want that to just become almost essential as the air that we need. This is just how it exists. It exists. It's there. And I shouldn't have to look for it. I should expect it if that's a way in which I see it. I should not have to say I'm looking for it to exist. I should feel comfortable knowing that it does exist because I've done my due diligence, other people, because it's a humanitarian thing at the end of the day. You know, the progress that we want, the changes that we want is the work and effort that we're putting into it each and every day. So we should never just get comfortable by saying, okay, we've done it. But done it doesn't mean that you are there yet, because progress is progressive. It keeps moving. So therefore you have to always be open. You have to be open to have conversations. We'll go back to our beginning. Everything starts with a conversation, a vision, everything. It has to have a conversation. It has to join forces with other things in order to survive. And I think that's what the future needs to start looking at. We need to continue the opportunities to build the conversation and be okay with allowing everyone to have their voice at every dynamic and every level. I think that was what I would add to that.
You know, Sandra, can you imagine, you know, I like what you just said about, you know, this idea of saying we've done it, right? Can you imagine if, you know, in our space, if we just treated security that way? Oh, we've done it, right? No, you have to stay on top of it, right?
No,
If
it's
you're gonna
definitely
be,
true. No,
you
can
know,
you
I
imagine
can't
if you had
imagine.
like Windows or any operating system, iOS, you know, Android operating system, you're like, no, we're good. It's, you know, version 15,
Right.
that's it. We're done with no more
Yep.
needed.
Right. Yeah. I mean, and anyone who understands that understands how ridiculous that would be, right? Or if I would just apply that to athletics, you know, I'm not a hockey fan, but can you imagine a goalie said, "Well, I stopped the goal. I've done it." Right?
Yeah.
The way you win the game is by stopping goals, right?
Yeah. Just
So
doing that is doing what you were programmed to do. It's like, no, well, you were designed or you were in place for this. And yeah, that's a
yeah.
good point.
So it's ongoing, absolutely.
Mhm.
So I've got some nuggets from Sandra I'm going to use if I may if I may steal those from you.
No, definitely. I think that's I think it's been very eye-opening this session, that the struggle that generations that passed or those over the last 30 years, how we've grown up and how diversity, equity, and inclusion have definitely changed or been more integrated into fabrics of society. And those are uncomfortable conversations for a lot of people, but they're conversations we need to have. I'd like to just open it up to both of you for last minute thoughts, reflections, anything like that.
Well, I'll just say that I'm appreciative for this opportunity to share some perspective, my own limited perspective, but hopefully it's some value to the greater conversation that continues around the importance of diversity and equity and inclusion. All three of those things are so vitally important, and I love the conversation about, especially about the fact that it's not just a program. You know, it's not, you haven't just done it, right? You gotta keep at it for the outcomes that we all deserve. And I'll just add just a couple of more plugs here, I guess, and that is that I want to encourage the community to get behind House Bill 2153, which is our bill for computer science education statewide. All 1 million K-12 kids in Tennessee are going to get computer science education as a result of this, and that's an important part of building a culture of recognizing that everyone's exposed to it and everyone ultimately has at least fundamental understanding of technology, and therefore there's a place for all of us to be not just consumers but very much producers in this space. That all of us can do that, and we need to apply that comprehensive approach from education to workplace attention, to DEI, to role models and mentors. Bring all that together such that we can achieve that, again, those outcomes that our society deserves. And our society deserves it because our society should be competitive. I mean, I think our diversity as a country is our greatest strength. in the international scene. And so we ought to take full advantage of that. So I'm guilty of preaching the gospel of computer science and tech, but I'll close there. And just again, thank you, Rami, for this opportunity, and the FedEx Institute for this opportunity.
Thank you, Meka. Yep, Sandra.
Yes, and I would definitely piggyback and follow through after Meka and saying, Remy, I thank you for this opportunity. Didn't quite know, what all to expect, but the conversation and the discussion, it has value. It has great value because it opens up the mind to thoughts and thinking that we don't, like I say, necessarily gravitate to, and to be able to talk about DEI to the space that we are challenging everyone and then yet holding everyone accountable for making that difference. We have given DEI to me, okay, these are the new words, but they didn't start with just these new words. They were always here. That's kind of like DNA. They've always been in our makeup. We have just now seen the value of including them. And I don't want us ever to shy away from that in, like I say, the conversations and the discussions in the bills and everything that we're doing, because it's fundamental. And I think if we take a moment to just think about it, it's really human interactions that create in everyone. We're looking at it in our workspaces. We're looking at it in our social media conversations. It's just who we are. We are diverse people because we're not all the same. So we kind of recognize that foundationally, how we were created. We literally have our DEI. We just need to now expound on it. We need to, and as Meka said, no, I don't want to preach. I don't want to give that sermon about it. And being in the tech space, having watched it evolve in this 20 years, never thought my aspiration would be more than to be the engineer or the solution. To be leading a team that's made up of a very diverse, smart group of professionals that look for me to not just talk it, but to be about it. That's a charge. And that's one that I hold in high esteem, that they would see me as that type of leader, a leader that actually can influence a change. And I think that's what I want us to all to keep in mind and kind of take away from this. Diversity, equity, and inclusion is who we are. It's a part of our DNA. We were created different, but we always have to embrace all of that difference and use it, for the greater good. It should be a value add to the greater good. And I'll stop right there, Remy, and turn it back over to you. And thank you, like I say again, for this opportunity.
Oh, thank you both. I'd like to thank both Meka and Sandra for joining us today. This has been a great session, very eye-opening for someone like myself as well. And luckily, our recording will be posted on our FIT webpage. We'll be sharing it out on our social media pages. And thank you everyone for joining. Thank you, Sandra. Thank you, Meka. Thanks everyone for coming.
Great. Have a wonderful afternoon, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a great day.
Thank you.